This year, 2021, marks the 100th anniversary of the Barras street market here in Glasgow. I'm going to take you back to the middle of the last century. Many people came to Glasgow looking to find their fortune. Many of them, when they got off the boat, they immediately scattered their possessions on the pavement and started selling clothing. And this was the start of Paddy's Market. The city clothes market at Green Dyke Street was opened, and that opened in 1875 and stayed functioning through till around 1920. And it was around this time that the police had an issue with the street traders, the pavement sellers, because they were clogging things up. The hawkers were having a hard time finding somewhere to trade. So the streets were pretty well closed to the traders. Something had to be done, and it's here that enter Maggie McIver. Margaret McIver was born in 1880 in Galston in Ayrshire, and she was born as Margaret Russell. She would have called Galston Goston, because that was a thick Ayrshire accent that she went on to have. Maggie became acquainted with a woman called Nellie Bell, and Nellie Bell had barrows, and she had a barrow at Parkhead Cross, and one day Maggie helped her out by looking after the barrow while Nellie went for a cup of tea, and Maggie got bitten by the bug. In 1881, a man called James McIver was born a stone's throw from here at number 36 Gallowgate. In 1902, Maggie and James got married, and together they then embarked on their married life and started to earn a living as a couple. They had a fruit shop in Main Street in Bridgeton, and Maggie was very hard working, because after the fruit shop was closed at night, she would go into the centre of Glasgow with bags of fruit and stand and sell it to the queues at the theatres. She was no stranger to hard work. Maggie went on to hire barrows from a company called Elliott's over in the Gorbals, and she hired her first barrow and a set of scales to weigh the fruit. Soon, Maggie and James realised that there was money to be made in the hiring of barrows, so they took a yard in Marshall Lane opposite today's Morrison's supermarket on Gallowgate, and they started to hire out barrows. And before long, the fleet of barrows had numbered over 300. In 1920, a parcel of land became available, and Maggie and James bought the land. And in 1921, the market was opened. The traders came to the market, they hired the barrows from the McIvers, and in 1926, 6 weekends on the trot, it was heavy, heavy rain, which was a disaster for the traders. So Maggie and James built sheds and put a roof over the barrows, and that allowed the barrow stall holders to trade during adverse weather. Two years later, they enclosed the whole thing, so the traders then enjoyed a place where they could go that was wind-tight and watertight, and they could carry out their business. In 1930, James died, and he died of malaria that he'd picked up during the First World War. So Maggie was then left to run her business, the market. She was rearing 9 children, and she had a real fight in her hands. But Maggie was a real tough character, and she knew how to succeed, and she worked very hard. The market at the time was selling products such as fruit, second-hand clothing, books, bric-a-brac, and it's often been said that at the Barras you can buy anything from a needle to an anchor. This year, 2021, marks the 100th anniversary of the Barras street market here in Glasgow. Here we are now in Muncur Street, part of the land that Maggie bought back in 1920 and laid out the market in 1921. And it's here that people come from all over Glasgow and the wider to the Barras, the great Saturday, Sunday market. Back in the day, The Barras was the only place that you could really go on a Sunday to buy things. The city centre was closed, the shops were all closed, not like today where you have shopping centres like St Enoch and Buchanan Galleries. Back then, the only place to come was the Barras. And the Barras had traders that everybody got to know. People like Prince Abadou. Prince Abadou sold the snake oil, this magical potion that was a cure for everything, as he would tell this story and draw the punters in. Others like Dick Lee, the Londoner who was known as Cockney Jock, who would sell all sorts of goods from the back of a van in the vicinity. Local man, Carlton-born Freddie Benedetti. He was the guy you came to if you wanted crockery, teapots, cups, saucers, anything of that sort. Household, Freddie was the man that would sell it. Down at the corner just behind me was the stall of a man called Kurt Cook, and Kurt was the guy who sold the jewellery, watches, rings, necklaces, bracelets, everything. Kurt was the man who would sell you those. And there were a few guys who sold curtains, people like Jerry Ward, and they were the barkers, they were the people who would really draw the crowds in. They would be saying, I'm not asking £2 for this, I'm not asking £1.50 or 30 bob, I'm not even asking a quid, give me 15 shillings and it's yours. And all the hands would go up as people wanted to buy whatever the offer of the day was, the towels or the curtains or whatever. But the place was street theatre, and the barkers were absolutely tremendous at getting the crowds in and selling. They were second to none at what they did. But that was also an attraction for people like the buskers to come into the Barras and try and earn a shilling or two. The strongman acts, Robbie the Robot in recent years, the old guy who dressed up in tartan, he was a pensioner but he played Bay City roller songs. There was also guys used to give you horse tips. So it was somewhere where you could come and get everything. The things that were on sale in the Barras was everything like carpets, linoleum, shoes, boots. Record stalls were very popular. The youngsters of the day would come into the Barras and go through all the record stalls, and of course it attracted them all in, and maybe even pick up a boyfriend or girlfriend, who knows. You could buy furniture, you could buy meat parcels. There was a stall, and still in the Barras, that does militaria, sells medals and anything to do with the military. Sports goods like fishing rods and golf clubs are all there. In recent years, there's been DVDs of dubious origin and tobacco of even more dubious origin. But in other words, in the Barras, you could buy everything. This year, 2021, marks the 100th anniversary of the Barras Street Market here in Glasgow. A couple of times a year, Maggie would put on a social event for the stallholders, and it would be held over in the St Mungo Halls in the Gorbals. And the menu was always the same: lentil soup, steak pie and trifle. There was also copious amounts of beer and spirits, and this led to it becoming quite a raucous affair. So much so that the St Mungo Halls eventually refused to take the booking. So Maggie decided she would build a social hall for the market traders. And in 1934, the Barrowland opened. 4 years later, it had to be extended because it was becoming very popular. And indeed, during the Second World War, the Barrowland was mentioned by name by Lord Haw Haw, the Nazi propagandist. But into the 1950s was really when the Barrowland took off, and it was Billy McGregor was the band leader with his band the Gaybirds. But 1958 was a disastrous year for the McIver family, because in the spring of that year, Maggie died. Later the same year, in August, the ballroom went on fire and was completely destroyed. The ground floor of the ballroom had been used by Maggie's son Sam McIver as a car showroom, and during the height of the flames, Sam went into his car showroom and drove the cars out to save them from being destroyed. In 1959 began the demolition and rebuild of the Barrowland. Much of the work was done by the McIver family and friends, And when the contracts were signed to construct the new ballroom, the McIver family insisted that it should be, where possible, workers from the East End would be employed to do the job. And in 1960, the new ballroom opened, and it was bigger and swankier than the original. And through the 60s and 70s, it was a very popular venue for couples from all over Glasgow and beyond who would go to the Barrowland for a night's dancing, and some ended up married. As the 1970s wore on into the 1980s, the popularity of dance halls began to wane, and the Barrowland was not immune from this. But a couple of things happened in 1983 that were to be important in the rejuvenation of the Barrowland as a venue. Firstly, I want to talk about the sign behind me. The famous Barrowland sign. It's 160 feet long. It's reputedly larger than the Coca-Cola sign at Piccadilly, and it costs £8.50 an hour to illuminate. Big switch on was carried out by Russ Abbott, the television personality, and it was all under a thing called the Margaret McIver Festival. But something else happened in 1983 that was perhaps much more important. The group Simple Minds asked Regular Music to find them a venue to film a video to promote their new album Waterfront. And the venue that they found was Barrowland. And this began a new life for Barrowland as a venue for concerts. And indeed in 1997, David Bowie came and gave a concert and went away with one of the stars from the ceiling of the dressing rooms. So the Barrowland had by now become one of the primary venues for rock concerts in the UK, and lots of bands always said that when they got the schedule for where their tour was going to be, everybody was looking to see that Barrowland was on it. Such was the importance of it. So the Barrowland had to have the floor reinforced to accommodate concerts, and it's still very popular today. So to conclude, I'd like to use the words written by Matt McGinn, the famous Glasgow poet, folk singer and raconteur. Matt was born in Ross Street, a few hundred yards from where I'm standing just now, and he wrote, "For Christmas he bought her a wee golden ring, but later it made him embarrassed. He'd forgot the first thing to turn green in the spring, his jewellery bought at the Barras."